Hello class, how are you? Back for social studies. And yesterday we talked about the three great thinkers of ancient Greece, okay? So we learned about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, okay? So we learned the different ways they teach us, okay, and learn. So we learned that Socrates teaches his students by asking questions, okay. So if, for example, the topic is about justice, so he would ask his students what they think about justice, okay. So that's how it teaches. And if the students answers, and then he asks questions again, all right, to kind of like do a discussion. So they're kind of doing like a dialogue kind of learning. So yeah, so Socrates asked questions, and the students would reply, and then questions again, and then reply. So then we also learned that Plato was one of the best student of Socrates. And Plato, he would uh, write down, okay, whatever he heard from Socrates. Okay, he just don't listen and ask question, but he would write it down. And sometimes he would even imagine what would Socrates say about something, and he would write it down. That's why he was able to wrote down 30 conversations that even um, in today's time we still, like, people still study them, people still learn about it, read about it. Okay, maybe when you go to high school or college you will learn some of Plato's conversation. All right, now here we also learned that Aristotle was Plato's student. Okay, when Plato created a school, so Aristotle was one of the student. And so for Plato, so the difference between Plato and Aristotle, Plato, when he think about something, for example, what is an ideal government? Okay, if the question is what is an ideal government, so Plato would imagine what an ideal government would look like, and he would write down about it. Okay, he would write down. However, Aristotle, he wouldn't imagine it. He would not imagine an ideal world. What he would do is he would go to that place and learn about it. Okay, like he was in Athens, right? So Athens was a country that practiced democracy. Okay, so for him to learn what democracy is, he has to be there. Okay, he has to be in that place learning about it, not just imagining it and hearing from someone else. So that's Aristotle. And today we're going to be learning about this person that conquers many lands, 2000 many lands in Greece 2,300 years ago. So he conquered many lands. That's why he was named Alexander the Great. And we learned yesterday that he was one of the students of who? Aristotle, right? So he was one of the students of Aristotle, and he will be the one we will be talking about today, okay? So Alexander the Great was born in Macedonia. Okay, Macedonia is somewhere here in northern part of Greece. Okay, right here. This is Macedonia. All right, Athens was right there. Okay, so that's where Aristotle came from. That's where Alexander was born. All right, so please listen. Okay. Okay, so one day when Alexander was still a boy, a man brought Alexander's father, Philip, a beautiful black horse, which he offered to sell to the king. The king tried to test the horse, whose name was Bucephalus. Okay, I'll show you, okay, Bucephalus. Nice name, right, for a horse? Okay, so, but Bucephalus would not let anyone climb on his back. Philip said he had no use for such an unimaginable horse. No, unmanageable horse. I'm sorry. So he's not manageable, he is unmanageable horse. That would have been the end of it, except that Philip asked Alexander, "Do you think you can control this horse better than the rest of us?" So Philip was asking his son Alexander. "I could manage this horse better than others," Alexander answered. Philip responded, "What will you give me if I let you try and you can't?" Okay, so I will pay the whole price of the horse, Alexander replied. The man burst out laughing. Philip chuckled and told Alexander to go ahead and try. If Alexander could control the horse, he could have him. Alexander noticed that Bucephalus was afraid of his own shadow and jumped away whenever he saw it. The boy grabbed Bucephalus' bridle and pulled his head around to face the sun so that the horse would not see his shadow. Alexander stroked Bucephalus gently and spoke softly to him. When the horse was calm, Alexander jumped lightly onto his back. Bucephalus did not try to buck Alexander off, and Alexander let the horse take off at full speed. The men watched Alexander and Bucephalus race off. They worried that Bucephalus would run away with Alexander. But soon the two turned around and galloped back. Alexander and Bucephalus became lifelong companions. Bucephalus went everywhere with Alexander. When Alexander was a grown man, he and Bucephalus rode into battle together, and Bucephalus is said to have saved Alexander's life more than once. So, what happened in this part of the reading class? So here's a guy. He brought a horse. He wants to sell it to the king, who's Alexander's dad. And the king tried to, test the horse, how this horse will behave and all that. And the king find out that it's not manageable. Okay, it's a very difficult horse. He wouldn't want anyone to climb on his back. And so the king was like, "Oh, this horse is no use for me." Okay, so he wants to get rid of the horse, but he asked Alexander. Okay, he asked his son, "Do you think you can manage this horse better than us or any of us?" And then he was very confident. Alexander was very confident. "Oh yeah, I can handle this horse." Okay, no problem. So what did Alexander do? So what did he do? What did he find out? Why was the horse very difficult to be handled? Why? Why would he be jumping around? Why? So he found out that the horse was afraid of his own shadow. So because he found out what's the reason why this horse is very difficult to handle, then he was able to find solution. How did he solve it? How did he solve the problem of the horse jumping around because he's afraid of the shadow? What did he do? He turned the horse around. Okay, he let the horse face the sun so he couldn't see his shadow. And because of that, the horse was able to calm down, and he could pat it, he could pet it, and he was able to ride on this horse, and they race around, and Basically, they became lifelong companions, right? Even in battles, they were together, him and the horse. Actually, according to the story, that the horse lived like very old, became like yeah, it reached old age, actually 30 years old, and Alexander even hold a funeral for that horse when it died. Okay, so that's how much he loved this horse Bucephalus. Now, King Philip wanted his son Alexander to have the best education possible. After After all, Alexander would be king someday. So Philip sent for Aristotle, who began teaching his young student. Alexander loved learning. He studied the Iliad, okay, and learned about the great deeds of Achilles. When he grew up, he kept a copy of the poem under the pillow while he slept. He hoped to grow up to be a great warrior like Achilles. Alexander also studied Greek, music, and ideas. He decided to do what he could to spread Greek ideas into other lands. So the King Philip, who's Alexander's dad, wants Alexander to have the best education. That's why he called for Aristotle, and Aristotle started teaching Alexander. Okay, and he also studied Iliad. Okay, the famous poem of Homer, and he really likes it. And he even kept the copy of a poem under his pillow because he wants to become a great warrior like Achilles. Okay, did he become a great warrior class? Well, I think so because he conquered a lot of lands, but actually he wanted to spread Greek ideas into other lands. That's why he conquered a lot of lands to spread Greek's ideas. All right. Now, Alexander marched his army into Persian territory. Remember the Persian invaded Greece? Now it's Alexander marching towards the Persian Empire, Persian territory. You know its territory, class? Okay, it's like it's owned by Persia, okay? So as his soldier advanced, they won every battle with the Persians. Many cities in the Persian Empire give up without a fight. One day, Alexander and his army arrived in a city called Gordium. Okay, so one day they arrived at Gordium. Okay, so in the middle of the city sat a chariot. The chariot was tied up with a very complicated knot. K-N-O-T, knot. It had been there for many years, and people said whoever could undo it, could undo the knot, would rule the world. Alexander went to inspect the knot, but could see no end to pull on to undo it. Okay, so there's no knot to pull on to undo it. Then he had an idea. He drew out, what do you think was his idea to undo the knot? You have a guess? Can you guess? What did he do to undo the knot? Okay, so what he did, he drew his sword and brought it down on the knot. The knot split apart. Alexander had cut the knot and proved himself worthy of ruling the world. Today, when we say someone has cut the Gordian knot, we mean that the person has found a quick, clever, unexpected way to solve an old problem, just as Alexander did that day in Gordium. So while he was on battle, conquering lands, he arrived into the city of Gordium, and there was this old chariot sitting there with a knot that's tied really really well that nobody can undo. Okay, many have tried to undo that knot, but nobody did. Nobody was able to undo it. Now, here comes Alexander. He tried to check it out. He inspected it, because there was a saying there that whoever can undo that knot would become the like great ruler. He would rule the world. So he went to inspect and check it out, and then he doesn't say um anything to pull it out, okay, so that you can undo. In the knot, like there's something you can pull so that you can undo the knot, but he doesn't say anything. So what did he do? What did he do so that he can solve the problem? He used his sword and cut it out. So problem solved. eh? Problem solved. And that's when the saying that's says when someone has cut the Gordian knot, so it means that they solved the problem very quickly, easily, okay, without problem. Okay, so that would be all for today, and I'm going to continue tomorrow for the rest of it. Okay, class? So I want you to think, if you are Alexander the Great, okay, what would you do uh, to wait a second. So what would you do if you're Alexander the Great? What would you do to tame Bucephalus? Okay, what would you do? Would you do the same that uh, Alexander did to the horse? Would you do the same? What do you think? And what if you're Alexander? What would you do to undo the knot? Would you use your sword? It's kind of cheating, right, class? Because he used the sword, but it's a quick way of solving the problem. Actually, maybe nobody have thought about it. Do you think someone have thought about it using the sword to cut it off, or he was the only one who thought about it? I wonder, class. Okay, all right. So that would be all today, and see you again tomorrow. Bye.